young people in this community. It's been an incredible journey. I think I've been around since the very beginning of Reclaim and its many iterations, and certainly in the move here to this space, which has been a really incredible opportunity, and it feels like it's growing beyond this space. But I'm sure Councilmember Cunningham probably talked about some of the work that we are doing at the city. We're really proud to have hosted the 6th annual Transportation Summit a couple of weeks ago, and Trachtenberg is here, who did an amazing job at organizing the whole event. Track, I want to give him a round of applause. It's just so incredible to see the growth of the community and how I think the language is changing, how people are identifying is changing, and it's challenging. And I think that's why spaces like Reclaim are so important. So to have some space, some support, some resources to really think about those ideas and how it's shifting our own identities, but also really shifting, I think, the way our culture and society thinks about gender. So, congratulations. I'm really excited about the next 10 years for Reclaim, and I love going to the Celebrate the Love brunches. So amazing. I think love is what gets us through these really, really challenging times that we are in. So, our president is coming here next week, or somebody's president, I don't know. Maybe the Russia's president, who knows. But they'll be here, and a lot of the vitriol and really violent rhetoric that they perpetrate is really harmful to our communities. So again, the need for healing spaces, healing modalities is such an important aspect of this work that we do in this community. So thank you, Reclaim, for being here and doing this work. It's just really incredible. And
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's really hard to follow behind the legendary Andrea Jenkins.
already spoke.
Yeah, no, I haven't quite spoken yet. So, hi, everybody. My name is Cunningham, and I'm a Minneapolis City Council member in the 4th Ward in North Minneapolis. This is Ward 4, St. Paul, with my Ward 4 twinsy over here. I am an out and proud Black, queer, trans man, and I'm really happy to be able to also say that I am the first out trans man of color elected to office in the United States, so we can say that. So I am so grateful to be here and to be a part of holding up this space of celebrating Reclaim in 10 years. That's a huge amount of time for really any organization, let alone an organization that serves Black and brown and queer and trans youth, given the fact that there is such limited access to funding to be able to provide those sort of support. So that just really speaks to the resilience of this organization and then the resilient space that they create for our young people. In Minneapolis, one of the things that we're working on, Council Vice President Jenkins and I, we're actually working on a municipal conversion therapy ban. The goal is that we want to set an example for other cities and municipalities around the state, that if the state isn't gonna step up and do it, that we will take care of our people, we will protect our people. And so hopefully we'll get to a tipping point where the state will feel that pressure that this is what is the right thing to do. It's not a partisan issue, we all need to take care of our kids. But it's not enough for us just to ban harmful practices. We also have to support and uplift healing practices, and that is what Reclaim is doing. And so it's powerful that we are here today and that we can say that this organization has been around for 10 years. I love Reclaim. I've been a proud board member of this organization and have seen it through moving here into this space, really supporting leadership. I've been really grateful to be able to be a part of this. So this is just the first 10 years, and I really look forward to coming back in 10 more years, and then 10 more years after that when I still hopefully look like this. And celebrate many more decades to come of the amazing, powerful work. That's what I'm hoping for, I'm hoping those genes. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who brought Reclaim into existence, who sustained its life, who continue to lead it forward, because like I said, it's not enough to stop harmful practices, but we need to uplift the healing, beautiful practices, and Reclaim is setting the example for not only the rest of the city, not the Twin Cities, not the state, but the entire country. So thank you all so much.
So settle in, because we're going to go for a little while. So there are some chairs if you want to come and sit up here.
You have 3 open spots in the front. A little floor space if your knees can handle it. Just a quick note, so this will be a live recorded podcast. One more time. This will be a live recorded podcast. So what that means is I'm going to ask you all a favor to be sensitive to the sound that you're making, because it will be picked up on these microphones. And that if you need to exit the room for any reason, that you try to do it just quietly. And at the half hour, halfway through the program, we'll be taking a short intermission, and that will be your opportunity to leave if you need to, enter if you've been waiting at the door, and use the bathroom if you need to. What's the podcast? And the podcast is Gender Stories, and I've been pointed to a special person at the back of the room. Senator Scott Dibble. Senator Dibble, I'm part of Minneapolis in the Minnesota Senate. Do you just want to say something or introduce yourself for a minute?
Oh, sure. Hello, I'm Scott, and could not be a bigger fan and supporter of Reclaim and just the heroic and amazing work we do here. So excited to be here at the open house, see the space. It's we just buzzed through, but it looks amazing. And there's my friend Mitra, my friend Andrea, excellent. So just I think I speak for all the electeds. We're here to support you in any way. Larger community as well. Give us a call. Let us know what you need. Because we're here for you. Thanks.
Okay, let's do it. Alrighty. Well, hello, Gender Stories listeners and new listeners. Maybe if you've never listened to an episode of our podcast, we are streaming live on Facebook, and we're also recording, and we will release this episode on all your favorite listening podcast platforms, so you can revisit it later. Now, I know I always say that I'm excited, but I am truly excited to be sharing this love fest for you all. My name is Alex Iantaffi, I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the host of Gender Stories. I moved to what is currently known as Minneapolis, Minnesota, on the Haudenosaunee land in 2008. And I remember that first email that Janet sent to some folks, because Janet was connected to folks I knew, telling about this idea that was not Reclaim yet, but was the seed for Reclaim. And so it feels really magical that now I'm here 10 years later interviewing Janet and interviewing other amazing people who are going to introduce themselves. I'm slightly intimidated. This is like the first big live recorded episode. I recorded a panel, but there were like 4 people present, so this is a lot more pressure. Thank you. But this couldn't be a better environment. So Reclaim's mission, in case you don't know, is to increase access to mental health support for queer and trans youth so they might reclaim their lives from oppression in all its forms. You can understand how with a mission like that, why Reclaim is so loved by everybody that you've listened to if you've already been on the live stream. And many of the clients here at Reclaim identify as trans as well as queer, which is why this seemed really relevant to gender stories. And many of the clients here are also BIPOC folks. So we're gonna look at all this different intersection in the conversations we're gonna have. And if you're wondering how to support Reclaim's work, there is a fundraising campaign and there is a goal of $250,000 that are gonna help build that scaffold that Felicia was talking about. You know, the foundations are there after 10 years, but there's so much more need. There's always a wait list, and queer and trans youth need to be loved now more than ever. So there is, you know, just if you're anywhere in the country, you can still give to Reclaim, even if Reclaim is in Minnesota. So there you go. But without further ado, I'm gonna let the amazing people around the panel introduce themselves. So tell all the listeners like who you are, what you do, and what's your relationship with Reclaim. And anyone can start. Maybe Janet, since you started Reclaim. What do you think? Anyone can start, but maybe Janet.
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Janet Bystrom, and I'm a therapist by practice. And I'll just quickly say I identify as cisgender and queer, and I go by she, her pronouns.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Autumn Brown. I go by she, her, and hers. I was the interim director at Reclaim between January 2015 and March 2016. So I was here supporting the founder transition with Janet. And now I work for a national organization called AORTA, the Anti-Oppression Resource and Training Alliance. So I do facilitation and political education. And I also have a podcast called How to Survive the End of the World that I co-host with my sister. And I'm so excited to be here because I love Reclaim so much.
So I'm Alex Soleayst. I am an alum of Reclaim. I am a paramedic by trade. I'm just really honored to be here with amazing folks. Reclaim is super important to me. I feel like I can say without question that I would not be here without Reclaim. And so it feels like a very special and important organization to me. I use she, her pronouns. I'm queer and I'm trans.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. So we're going to explore a little bit the story of Reclaim, and then we're going to also explore it through the lens of gender a little bit. And Janet, maybe you can get us started by describing the moment of need that Reclaim was born out of. You know, during the tour earlier, Mary Rose talked about it, but for the listeners, why did this organization come to be the way it is?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back and telling just a little bit of a longer history that led up to the moment of need, and backing up into the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
We're gonna talk about, you know, the AIDS crisis. We're gonna talk about Stonewall, right? We're gonna talk about the time in which, you know, people were thrown in jail and people did not, coming out just didn't even happen, right? People didn't even have the language or the words sometimes to talk about what their experience was. And so then when people did start to come out and talk about themselves and their identities, I would say that at that point it was seen as a crisis and it was seen as a mental health problem, and something that people needed a lot of therapy and support around. And so, you know, once you got past the gasp, then it was kind of understood that you probably needed some very serious support. And so, you know, what I think started happening into the early 90s, and I want to talk about the beginning of District 202, which was a very important social service, not a social service organization actually, that's what was different about it. is that there was this idea that you could, as an adolescent, come out into your sexual orientation, your gender identity, and that could actually be just a normal thing, right? That you didn't need therapy, that you didn't need social services, that you just needed a space to get to hang out and be yourself, right? And so District 202, which was not a school, it sounds like a school, but it wasn't. It was a nonprofit that had a tremendous amount of grassroots support from people in community that were really, it was a very refreshing idea. And it was a wonderful space that people could come into. And one of the interesting things that happened into that space, because it was a drop-in center and people did drag shows and they ran a coffee bar, and it was kind of a by and for youth model, right? So it was about youth empowerment and youth development. And again, which is a very exciting and important way for people to start to experience themselves as not as something's wrong with me and I need help, but this just happens to be a part of who I am and this is what I have to offer. And I need to meet people to date, you know? Yeah. But what happened into that space was that a lot of the people that ended up coming and utilizing that space were queer and trans youth of color. And these were young people who were extremely marginalized in their families and sometimes in their communities. And they actually just needed a safe place to be off the streets. And so it was an interesting thing that what you ended up having is you had a lot of people coming into that space who had incredibly high needs. They were suffering under multiple layers of marginalization, and they had incredibly intense health and mental health issues going on. But the challenge in that space then is that the staffing was staffed around youth empowerment. And so the people that were working there didn't have some of the therapeutic skills and kind of the capacity to be able to work with the really intense crisis that started to come up in that space as young people were there trying to do what they needed to do and get what they needed. And so we were, in a way, kind of a little bit back to square one, right? In terms of saying, so now what do we do as a community? This is clearly, this is who needs a certain kind of support. At that same time, I was working over at Face to Face. So District 202 started in 1993, and it was around until 2009, right? Across the river in St. Paul was Face to Face, which is a youth serving organization where I was doing just a kind of slow, quiet work, doing mental health around gender and sexual orientation for young people. And so we started doing more and more of the mental health, which was kind of complementary to what was happening over at District 202. But what started happening when I was doing my work with people is that a lot of times people would call and say, do you have a therapist of color? I have a youth of color, and they need to talk to someone who looks like them. And I would look around me, and I would look at myself, and I'd say, okay, well, that's not me. And I could not think of another practitioner in the entire Twin Cities who I knew that I could comfortably refer this young person to, who could skillfully meet their needs and perhaps look like them. And so that became to be very problematic to me. So when in 2009, unfortunately, when the economic downturn happened, District 202 was lost as a resource to us in the Twin Cities, which was a really devastating loss. And a lot of the mental health support that we had built up for queer and trans youth at Face to Face was also cut, right? And so in that moment of need, in that moment, I was holding a lot of these relationships. I was holding a lot of care for young people. And I thought, this is the moment in which we have to come by and bring these two things together, which is, how can we actually use the organization of Reclaim to change the landscape of care, as we're talking about scaffolding, such that we are creating and supporting practitioners who are queer and trans and people of color to be able to be there as a resource so that young people coming up can meet and talk to someone who looks like them, who understands their experience. And so ever since the beginning, I think that has been such an important part of Reclaim, is not just the service that we provide, but actually shifting the landscape of care itself, such that the young people are coming into relationships with people who are healing healers, you know, and people who are needing healing themselves because of their own histories of trauma, but we have to be caring for both of those layers of the healing cycle, right? And so that was the moment of need, and that I think is some of the mission that Reclaim is trying to meet.
I love that you talked about change in the landscape. You know, as a systemic therapist, one of the things I really love about Reclaim is that it doesn't just look at the needs of youth, but really challenges that kind of more medicalized approach to mental health. And it really seems located to me much more in the framework of healing justice, right? And really restorative practices in community, and not just looking at healing as an individual one-on-one affair. And so Reclaim has grown and changed a lot over the past 10 years, and I'm curious about how do you all see the changes that have happened and how they fit in this larger context of kind of healing justice, and not in this separation between, you know, therapist and client. There are people who are not doing well and who are sick, and there are people who are well and they're offering the support. That's not at all the model of Reclaim, right? It's like we're all in this together. We are within the systems of oppression, and how can we support each other's mental health, emotional health, well-being, not just on an individualized level. So can any of you tell me a little bit more about how the changes have happened, maybe some of the initiatives that have happened over the past 10 years, and how do you see that fitting in with this idea of healing justice and healing together in community, and kind of challenging that traditional model of psychotherapy? I know, just a little question, right?
That's a big one. Well, I think, you know, thinking about this question of scaffolding that Felicia raised earlier, that I think this has been one of the core questions for Reclaim over the duration of its existence, that how are we scaffolding and growing to meet the incredible need, while also building Reclaim as an institution that's modeled in alignment with healing justice values. And so one of the tensions, or I would say one of the things the values of healing justice are in tension with the way most people are trained into the therapeutic practice, and the way most therapeutic organizations and institutions are structured, which is very hierarchical. And the way most institutions are designed to grow is incredibly linear. And that's not how we understand the healing process to actually be, right? That it's actually very cyclical. It's like the opposite of linear. And so, so I would say that one of the things that has been present over the course of Reclaim's life is this desire to be engaging with the idea of institutionalizing or institutionality in a different way, trying to think through the lens of, well, what does it look like for us to institutionalize as a collective, or what does it look like for us to try to implement a sense of collective or shared leadership at all, you know, in sort of all parts of the organization, regardless of where people are fitting in. So that includes, you know, having a peer therapeutic support model happening in the therapy groups at sort of all across the organization, having a peer educational model where practitioners are coming together. So from pretty early on in the organization's life, there was a group for practitioners of color specifically to come and be in a learning practice together, which is actually how Felicia was I think you were one of the original facilitators of that practitioners group, right? That's so thank you, you're amazing. And so, you know, it's sort of, I would say it's been like the experiment has been kind of like fractal, you know, sort of looking at how can we be attempting collectivity in all these different places that are typically very top down. And the point at which I entered the organization as the interim director was in the immediate wake of an experiment to collectivize the institution's leadership that didn't work, right? And of course, we know that for nonprofit organizations, anytime we're trying to experiment, we're putting ourselves in confrontation with the way these systems are set up to make sure our experiments fail. And so there, you know, there were some really significant challenges in that moment, and there was a need to sort of pause, slow down, draw out a leadership transition process with support to figure out, all right, here we are, we're still a nonprofit, we're still a nonprofit institution that is both governed by legal and fiscal codes that have not caught up with the reality of the future, right? Anyone who works for a nonprofit, you know what I'm talking about. And we're an organization that bills for services, and that has a whole other set of limitations around how we can talk about what we do, right? And so how do we actually slow down and try to effect a change process where we're constantly moving the model to be more in alignment with a healing justice approach, while also keeping the organization alive, right? And keeping the organization alive, and that at the end of the day, I think everyone who has intersected with Reclaim, no matter where, and one of the things that I've observed and one of the reasons why I believe so strongly in this organization, everyone who intersects with this organization understands that it has to stay alive, right? That people's lives are literally on the line if the doors close here. And I think that recognition of how critical the service is has enabled us to actually meet conflicts and tension and places where we end up in confrontation with our own values and slow down and say, all right, let's orient to survival. And then the scaffolding means that eventually we'll be at a place, we hope, it's 10 years in, how much longer is it going to take before we're not just surviving, right? But I mean, that's a question I think for everyone in our movements right now. It's not just a question for Reclaim, but we do hope that we get to a point with that scaffolding, with this beautiful plan that you all have developed, where we're not just trying to figure out how are we surviving in relationship to our values, but how is this organization and everyone who gets to touch it getting to do more than that now, yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm talking about all the different parts of the organizations. I'd love to hear a little bit what it was like to receive services at Reclaim, and talking about this kind of healing justice model and what it meant to you as a service user. How do you feel?
Yeah, so I think for me, a lot of just receiving any sort of mental health services or healthcare in general was incredibly traumatic. It still is traumatic in a lot of ways. And I think one of the beautiful things about Reclaim is that, it was never perfect. It was always a learning process as time went on, but it was a place that I could come in and I could say, hey, this is what makes me uncomfortable. This is where I'm struggling and how I'm struggling to receive services. And I would go through cycles of coming and going and being able to receive services and not receive services in my own kind of journey. But it was beautiful from my perspective of receiving those services, is that the organization was willing to grow and heal with me as I continued to progress and grow and come into myself. So that's what felt most valuable for me. And then just also that the push from not only the community but the organization itself, that this would be a resource that would be here to stay. And I know for me that when Face to Face closed and when District 202 closed, it was heartbreaking. I would go to Gender Group every Thursday. I would go to events at District 202, and it was the time in my life in a period when I was not able to be myself, that I would have just a short period of time where I could be myself. And then all of a sudden those services were kind of dropped out from under me, and this beautiful thing called Reclaim came about and said that we don't know how we're going to do it. We have no idea how this is all going to work, but we will be here, and we will be here to support you and the community that was built out of that.
And what strikes me from there is that often that's what happened to a lot of us who are trans and queer, right? I don't know how I'm gonna be, at least personally, I know that was I don't know what this means. I don't even understand my own gender right at the beginning of the journey, but I know that there's more, and my experience is so much more expansive than what the world is telling me, right? And I love that Reclaim is like doing this expanding and kind of breaking open this like model of care and really looking at how do we provide services, but within a healing justice framework, which in some ways is a paradox, you know, kind of billing for services under insurance, and yet also serving people who don't have insurance and make this sustainable. And at the same time, being on this journey with a lot of people are also on their own journey in terms of gender and or sexuality. And so I wonder kind of how your own kind of gender stories, whether it's identities, experiences, relationships, have been touched by the work that you've been doing with Reclaim, by your relationship with Reclaim. Like, I'm just really curious, like, has it touched your sense of identity or experience, your relationships, when it comes to looking at things through that lens of gender?
Well, I came in an ally and left queer. So. I was deep in a closet, and Reclaim was actually, it's interesting to think about now, but Reclaim was like a very pivotal part of my journey of actually finally coming out as queer. And many people who are in this room right now were a part of that process. I'm getting emotional of like seeing me, and so it was interesting for me because I came into Reclaim as like someone who was like, I'm here because I have a skill set. My skill set is to support organizational development, and I'm here to support this transition, and I'm a facilitator, and I'm a this, and I'm a that, and I'm bringing my expertise to the table in this particular way. And I was completely transformed by actually being in queer space. And yeah, I think I was literally, we were in one of the things that happened during my tenure in leadership is we moved into this space. And the last 2 days that I was here, we had a staff and board retreat that was facilitated by Dr. Joy Lewis, who was amazing. Yeah, love her. And I remember that we were having our closing circle in that main space when I like came out to everyone in the room. And Kamara, of course, was like, Kamara knew from the moment that they saw me. Everybody knew but me. So I would say Reclaim absolutely helped me heal in relationship to my own, the way my gender and sexuality intersects, and the way that, like, particularly being a mother, and I became a mother at a very young age, and the way that the way society really, pigeonholes femmes who become mothers to, gender is performed in a particular way, sexuality is either performed or not performed at all in a very particular way. I didn't have a lot of space to explore those parts of my life. And then I was here every day for over a year, being in an energetic field where transformation is literally happening all around me in the space. It's impossible not to be touched by that. It was, I think, so I don't think it's an accident that I ended up being the person who was here and at that particular moment in time, and I will be grateful to the day I die and beyond, that I got to be here.
I think I came in with a very, not only a binary view of gender, but also a binary view of sexuality as well. And I came in with a view of that if I was going to be trans, that I had to prove that I was trans, and that I had to prove that I was trans enough. And Reclaim allowed me to not do that. I still feel like I'm on a journey with my gender, especially around self-hate and self-destruction around that. So I think that allowed me to see that there are multiple possibilities. I also wanted to talk about how powerful it was to see, as a youth at that time, to see adults show up in their own their own gender and their own sexuality. I didn't know how to be a queer and trans young person, and I certainly didn't know how to be a queer and trans adult. And to have models to say that, like, not only can you survive, but there is light on the other end, and there are adults that exist, there are people that are living in this world that look similar to you, that have feelings similar to you, was just incredibly powerful. And I hope that I'm now well into adulthood, and I hope that I am, like, I'm hoping that I can now be a model for young queer and trans people, because I know how important it was for me, and also for, like, people to show up authentically in their own journeys. So not only the youth to show up in their own journeys, but for the adults of the organization to show up in their own journey, and not to say that, like, I know everything, I know how it is to be whatever you are, but to grow and change as part of that organization as well.
I suppose I can add my two little pieces, I guess. One is to say, I suppose I came in to reclaim a lesbian and I left queer. I love the word. It's just, it opens up so much space. I love it. And so yeah, that's my now. I'll tell a very brief story about myself when I was a kid. When I was about 4th grade, when puberty, does its work. I found myself having quite a crisis, and I remember very vividly sitting in my basement and crying really, really hard, and kind of being beside myself and just saying over and over again, I want to be a boy, I want to be a boy. And for me, okay, I wasn't saying I am a boy, I was saying I want to be a boy. And for me, what that was about was that as I got into this place where I had to do just girl things, my world started getting very small. I had to start limiting the things that I could do. Some of the things that I really loved were no longer felt like a safe and comfortable option for me. And so, it's a very astute, but also I think an incredibly sad observation, is to realize that the only way that little 4th grade-year-old me could figure out how to keep being who I wanted to be in the world was to change who I was. Was to become a boy. That was in my mind the only way that I could keep having choices and options to live the life that I wanted to live. And so for me, that part of my gender story is that I think it just sensitized me to the power of gender, to the power of the importance of just like who that little kid was, how innocent, how full of life, how many things I wanted to just explore and share with the world, and how arbitrary it was that those things started to become limited and unsafe for me to do. And so I've carried that with me throughout all of my years. And my story isn't a transgender story in the same way that it is for so many people. But I feel some sense of pain and loss in my own life around that. And I just feel like anything that I can ever do to help keep more options for people, in the way that you're talking about, that you don't have to be trans enough or this enough or that enough, just like be you, and to create spaces where people can really listen deeply and with integrity to that sense of who they are, so that you can live that out into the world without too many, jogs to the left or the right, that you don't need to take, So to me, that's Reclaim is, I hope, a place that offers that protection and support for people.
I love all the things that you talked about, and I love this idea of how important space is, not just a space in terms of the physical space, although that's important as well, but the space between people, right? All the different people who have touched Reclaim, the space that gets created in this community. And one of the tenets of Gender Story is that we all have a relationship with gender. And so how can we become more expansive, more critical, more engaged in not just our own story, but other people's stories, so that we don't keep putting ourselves and each other in those kind of tiny boxes. And I think one of the things that Reclaim does so well is to create this expansive space of possibility. this expansive space of you don't have to negotiate away any part of yourself, because often contraction comes from fear, in my experience as a somatic practitioner, right? And there's a lot of policing of bodies, policing of gender, policing of sexuality, policing of racialized identities. So like all these contractions that happen in dominant culture, and here's Reclaim trying to create this more expansive space, which is imperfect, but yet it's evolving, it's intergenerational. I love what you said about kind of seeing adults, right? I remember the first time a young person said to me, I didn't know that I could still be genderqueer or gender fluid in my 30s. That's what I had to choose, right? And so, and you know, for me, I was in my 30s at the time, and I'm 48 now, and my sense of gender has always evolving, right? I love the like non-binary umbrella. It makes so much sense, and it wasn't even available, you know, when I was a little kid in Italy in the early 70s going, I don't know, I just love it when people think I'm a boy, but also not the kind of boy that people think, right? Like a really queer boy, right? It's so complicated, right? And here's the space that can hold complexity, that can hold all this intersection, and suddenly all these bodies that are contracting for lots of different reasons can breathe, right? And so what is it that you think Reclaim makes possible so that young people can breathe a little bit more, you know, and don't have to negotiate away any pieces of themselves, right? Because often you access services for LGBTQ youth, but they might not be really competent in understanding of racialized oppression, you know, or vice versa. And so what is it about Reclaim that makes it possible for people to expand, just like you described your own expansions in your own lives? You know, what are those qualities?
I think it's a safe space. I know we've talked a lot about space. For much of my journey as a Reclaim alum, Reclaim didn't have a space like it has now, but there was always space. There was always a willingness and a commitment to, no matter where we are, we're going to create a place and a time where people can explore and be held up, not only by each other, but you know, by themselves, to grow and to learn and to be accepted. So I don't know. I was just thinking a lot about that when you were talking about space. That a physical place is great, but it's also just it's the emotional, it's the spiritual, it's the energy that comes from this place.
Container setting.
Yeah.
I'll just say, I guess, and this is something I guess I've always just felt about the therapeutic exchange, man, like, I'm so lucky, right, to get to do this, because I think this is one of the kind of core values I think in Reclaim that I believe is still operational today, which is that in any exchange, there is the equal opportunity not only to transform someone else, but for you to be transformed as well, right? So, and that can happen simultaneously, that can happen, you know, in an exchange, but as a practitioner, every time that I'm sitting down, like those possibilities are just co-present, right? And so that means across power dynamics, whether that's coworker to coworker, you know, boss to supervisee, but whatever that is, right? Is that what I think is so exciting is that we just don't know who's going to make what and into what in any given moment, you know. And so, you know, as I look at myself and who I have become over the years, you know, so many people will say, "Oh, Janet, you know, thank you for your support. You know, you changed my life. You know, you saved my life," or whatever. And I was like, "You don't even know. You don't even know, right? Because you saved mine. You made me real. You made me become the person that I am, right? Through the exchanges that we had." And those are not just like words to me. I feel that every single day. And so I think that when people come into those relational spaces where they really feel that that's true, who knows where the conversation's gonna go. And I think that is one of the kind of cool and scary things about living in Reclaim, right, is that we don't know what we're gonna make together. We actually don't.
Looking at the faces of the staff.
We don't. And you can't know, right? We can't know. We can only figure it out together, right? And when there's that sense that there really is, like, I need you to help me figure that out, and vice versa, like, you know, like, that is that sense then that we are coming in like this, and I don't care what your role, whatever that is, but we need each other in community. We belong to each other in this way, and so I think that I don't know. There's just something about that I hope feels palpable or tangible to people when they are in relationship here.
I really love that you said we belong to each other, because I do feel like that is one, to answer your question, one answer to that I think is that, you know, as humans we naturally want to find belonging. Like, that's sort of what we're looking for as we're, like, you know, moving through the world, trying to figure out, like, do I belong to you? Am I safe? You know? And so I think that, like, there is a container that really is about belonging here in a way that I've never really experienced in another place. And then I think in a more technical response that I think Reclaim's understanding from the beginning that healing is going to happen in a lot of different ways, and that there needs to be attention to a lot of different modalities and opportunities to, like, interface with a lot of different modalities, has been a really important part of it too. That therapy is at the heart of what Reclaim does, but there's always been a sense of either trying to ensure that there are other resources on site here, other healing modalities that are happening here, or that people are being resourced to be in relationship with other kinds of healing modalities as well. And especially, I think about, you know, the conversations that we had that I know were happening before I came in and happen and continue to happen now about, like, how aligned do the practitioners need to be around even their own, the type of therapeutic practice that they're doing in the room with the client. You know, because for a lot of therapeutic institutions, what's happening in the room with the client has to be consistent across, you know, in terms of the therapeutic approach. It has to be consistent regardless of, you know, who the client is and who the therapist is, and that is not something that Reclaim believes in, right? That, you know, and it's a place of real, like, it's a place of real tension, right? Because it's like, if you're not saying everyone on our therapeutic team is practicing the exact same kind of therapy, then you can't measure the process in the same way for all the practitioners, for all the clients, right? Well, we know that the need to measure the healing process, right? Measure the healing process, like, that's basically what's the word? Oxymoron, thank you. So, you know, so we know that, like, the idea that this would have to be measured is, like, comes from capitalism anyway, and yet again, we're inside this institutional setting where, like, we do have to be able to measure something, right? And so that's been an interesting tension too, the recognition that practitioners themselves are going to be evolving in how they practice and what modalities they're going to be bringing in, or how they're even, you know, going to be practicing the therapeutic model that they were trained in, how that's going to change over time as they professionally develop. So how do we ensure that practitioners are developing, evolving, and changing, that clients are having a consistent experience of Reclaim, regardless of who they're working with, and that they're getting access to everything that they need? Like, those are really complicated questions that Reclaim, in my experience, has always been very committed to answering, and then answering again, and then answering again, like recognizing that it's like a process of iteration. It's not like, all right, we landed Reclaim's approach, and now we're just going to be an institution for the next 50 years. It's not, that's not our way of being.
And what I love about Reclaim is that although it has been surviving through an economic downturn, through a capitalist kind of
It's like, did the
dominant
downturn
culture,
end?
right? I don't
I
know.
don't know.
I mean, for some people,
For some
it's
people
always
it
been a
is.
downturn.
It's also bad.
So it's complicated, right?
Yeah.
And what I love about Reclaim is that even though it operates within this model, there hasn't been this need to like follow in the same footsteps. So there hasn't been a like, this is the Reclaim approach and only we can do it, right? This is the right way to do things, or this is the right, you know, it is this kind of adoration, it is this ever-evolving process, and I love that we're like sniffing each other, you know, recently a beloved Susan Raffo has written this beautiful blog post about smell, and how smell is like the first way that we orient to safety and belonging, right?
Yes.
And so when people are coming here to Reclaim, they're orienting to safety and belonging in a dominant culture, in a world that's telling queer and trans youth, you don't belong, or you cannot belong in this way, or if you want to belong, you need to negotiate a part of you away. And so it is a precious space in that way. And so I'm wondering, for the listeners out there who are not in the Twin Cities, who might be all over the place, in fact all over the world, and who are listening to this because they maybe their own gender identity is more expansive, or other people that they love, and how can, you know, do you have anything to share about how can you orient to safety and belonging? How do you find the space of relationship that Reclaim offers, kind of ready-made to so many folks in the Twin Cities, but how can people kind of orient to those relationships, to these healing processes that Reclaim offers? And I don't know, that's a hard question that's just come to my mind, so I'll give you a moment to think about it. It was not one of the predetermined questions, so I just wonder what you say to queer and trans and even cis folks out there who are on their own gender journey, on kind of what is it that they could find in their lives kind of that is similar to the Reclaim space, but not within this physical, geographical space.
So I think two things for me were just one, the willingness to have growth and change, and to say, you know, I think about my own therapy journey and to say, okay, today we're going to try this therapy model, and then I would come back a week or a month later and say, hey, this isn't working for me. Can we change it? And to have it be a system where that's okay, and that I was empowered as a client to say that. And then on the reverse end of it, for the people that were serving me to say that they are growing and changing as clinicians and practitioners themselves. So it felt like we were on this journey together. It wasn't it was a team effort. It wasn't ever, you know, a singular thing. We were just in it together.
I'll just say, that's a hard question that you asked, Alex, but but one of the things that comes to my mind is I think of how often I've heard people say, well, you know, that they just don't feel ready for love. You know, they don't feel lovable. They haven't figured themselves out enough. They feel ugly, gross, all kinds of things, you know? And I, you know, it's like loving oneself and being loved is this reflexive process, right? Where it's kind of moves back and forth. And I think sometimes, a lot of times people feel like I have to figure out how to love myself before I can be in relationship. And I think there are so many people out there, but people won't take the risk to open themselves up because they don't feel that anyone would ever love them, right? I think it is such a remarkable thing, and whether that's in a friendship, something romantic or not, but to open yourself to the fact that maybe you are lovable, and that maybe somebody could love you just as you are, exactly where you are, in the place that you are, wherever that looks like, that you could let that in. Yeah, you don't have to do it all on your own, and you don't have to do it alone. and you don't have to wait for the perfect moment, or even the perfect person maybe. But I would dare to say that wherever you happen to be, maybe there's somebody in your, in your sphere that you could like let love you a little. Yeah.
I feel like we're all breathing that in.
It's free.
Yeah. Hey! I'm like, how much do I owe you for this session? Just kidding. I feel like such a good question. I want to like give the 2 pieces of advice that I've gotten in the last year. I've been through like a very intense year over the last year of my life. Lots of transformation and change. A lot of it not with my consent. And I got 2 pieces of advice this year that really like shifted the trajectory of what was happening in my life. And one was to ask for what I actually need, not what I think I can get. Such an important reorientation. I see the face. Oh yes, that's the face that I made when I was told to do that, and I was like, yeah, that it helped me understand that like so much of my orientation to my own needs is like, well, let me just get my most basic need not to be harmed met. And that's not a goal, or that's not a visionary goal. That is a goal, but it's not a visionary goal for my life, especially for my life in relationship to others. So that was really helpful, just as a orientation. And I think that my hope is that anyone, anywhere, no matter what community they're living inside of, no matter what conditions they're living inside of, no matter how harmful, abusive, challenging, scary, that they can at least assess what is it that they actually need, right? Because without that self-knowing, it's really hard to define a pathway out of harm, right? And then the other piece of advice that I got from one of my dearest friends, Danielle Sarah, is you are the first source of your own pleasure. You are the first source of your own pleasure. Yeah.
That's really beautiful, and I love that this piece is like, let the love in, but also know what you need, and be in this transformative space together of relationship. The theme and the thread that I keep hearing from each and every one of you, and from everybody who's kind of spoken in the program before the podcast, is really this piece about relationship. We're not alone, we're doing this together, and wherever we are, we can find maybe one other person we can connect to. We can create this space in between of possibility, of potentiality. And so talking about potentiality, we're celebrating 10 years of Reclaim, 10 years of becoming, and here's more becoming, right? There is this new fundraising goal, there is this new growth, the foundation are there, and now we want to build up. What is your wish for reclaiming ongoing becoming? As an organization, as a space, as a community, for maybe the next 10 years?
Well, shall I? I think, okay. Is it in the strategic plan to like create a practitioner institute?
We don't know, but maybe it should be.
Ongoing strengthening of our practitioner training.
Yeah, I think like, this shit is so fly, you know what I'm saying? And so I feel like there's a magic that is happening here. There's a magic that's happening here that is something that, I hesitate to say that other people need. I don't want to sound like, like a zealot, unless I want to. But I do feel, I feel like I wish for other practitioners all over the this land that we're calling the United States currently to be able to access the resource of practitioner development that Reclaim offers. And so I think that there is some, shape shifting that may be coming for Reclaim in that regard, right? Because that is a much bigger scope. From the beginning, Reclaim has been very, very regionally focused. But we've also always had conversations about what would it look like to sort of reach beyond this particular region, whether that's opening kind of pods of services in other parts of Minnesota, so that people are accessing this resource outside of the Twin Cities region. What would it look like to have a sort of national training program, so that people so much excitement. I love this. I love all the faces. But to just make sure that that there's a dandelion effect happening with this model. I think that would be incredible to see. And I think I hear maybe we're growing out of this space piece of, what does growth mean? And I think that growth doesn't have to look like Reclaim as an institution continuing to get bigger, right? Growth can be viral. It can look like other organizations or other groups in a similar model and a similar method being created in other spaces, like seeding. Maybe seeding is better than virus. Yeah, let's not do that.
Let's stick with the science.
I mean, viruses are very resilient. So I'll stop. Either metaphor could work. Thank you. Stop shitting on viruses. Okay.
Can I go?
Yeah.
So I want to thank you, Ellie, for saying, just talking about just the process of experiencing therapy and also the hard spots, and that space where you can see the active growth and change happening between practitioner and service receiver. And I want to say that I think that one of the things that I feel so committed to, and this sounds like one of those oxymorons, but being an expert at not knowing is what is so important as a provider to bring into the therapy room. Because if we have already decided, right, that we know people's identities, if we know how things are going to turn out for them, if we know what the problem is and we just have to help them understand it, right, we've already lost, right? We just go pack up and go home, right? And so it is a real skill to be able to be an expert at not knowing, to sit with someone and to be confident, actually, right, that there's something that happens in this relational space that is deeply important, that I am vital to, right, that I do have expertise, but there's a whole lot of not knowing, right, that is actually really critical to that conversation being exactly what it needs to be. And so I want to say, I think that, again, therapy done well, that's what you feel happening. And as a practitioner, you're right in there with it, right? You are in there with it. And I want to say that I think Reclaim It as an organization, right? If you're looking again at queer and trans movement building, it's coming from behind. I mean, it's coming from the young people, right? It's getting made right in front of us every single day, right? Our job is to get out of the way, right? It's to help listen with a particular ear that helps, for us to be able to find the words, right? To be able to talk about what are we doing and who are we becoming. But you have to do that so carefully and so sensitively, right? And so by the time you're a practitioner, right, and if you were quote unquote an adult, right, sometimes that you're part of the problem too, right? So how do we in the therapeutic dynamic and then as an organization continue to be comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing and figuring it out together? We have to do that to level the playing field around race, gender, economics, all of these kinds of things if we really are going to do the work. And so What I want to say, what you just said, Autumn, is about bigger. Growing isn't always about bigger. What I am interested in and hope for Reclaim is that it grows deeper, that it gets better and better and better at not knowing, and better about the expertise of not knowing in a particular way around gender and sexuality, so that people's voices really come through clearly, right? That's what we do, and then we get really good at that, right? And that process of being able to really critique therapy itself, to be able to deconstruct that, to stand outside of it, to see how it works, to take it apart and put it back together, is where it gets super exciting. And that's where we have a ton of latitude. I don't care if you're billing or if you're in your nonprofit structure, there's so much opportunity for creativity and freshness and exciting things to happen. Just, in a room when you shut the door, So.
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think I have 2 wishes for Reclaim. My first wish is to be kind and gentle to yourselves about where you are and how far the organization has come and the work that it's doing now. I think growth is powerful and important, but I think it's important to reflect on the work that we're already doing and how many people this organization has served and saved. The other thing that I would say is I, as an alum, would really love to find a way to give back to the organization that I feel like has saved my life, and to pull other alum in to have a voice and to give back to this wonderful, beautiful organization. So those are my 2 wishes for Reclaim.
I love all the beautiful wishes and the imagery, and I'm also aware of kind of time and bringing this conversation to a close. And usually at the end of the podcast, I always ask, is there anything that I have not asked you about that you were really wishing that I'd asked you about? So is there anything else that you want to share about the conversation we've been having and about Reclaim? And there might not be, but I always like to ask a question.
I want to share that, okay, in addition to Reclaim being a pivotal part of my coming out journey, Reclaim was also inadvertently a pivotal part of my oldest child's coming out journey, because it was because of something that I was working on related to Reclaim. And I was in my home. I think I was watching a recording of someone telling a story, or I was talking about something on the phone maybe, but my oldest child, Finn, heard the word non-binary. And 3 weeks later, was having a sleepover at their grandparents' house, and woke up in the middle of the night and turned to their grandmother and was like, I'm a binary person. And to her credit, her response was, I'm sure that's fine. She had no idea what he was talking about. And so the next morning, when I went to pick my children up, she pulled me aside and was like, this happened. And I don't know what it is. And I was like, I know what it is. I know what's going on. And and Finn had definitely been in a question around their gender since they were 3 years old, but they didn't have language for it. And so, I think it's sort of by osmosis, sort of just by exposure to a conversation I was having because of the work I was doing with Reclaim, that Finn got the language that was this is what it is, this is who I am. And so yeah, I love that. I love knowing that that my children's, all 3 of them actually, their experience of their gender has fundamentally, and how they're supported around it has fundamentally been shifted by the existence of Reclaim. And they're not, they're not clients here,
I think I wanted to share a message of hope. A lot of times especially when I was younger, I didn't think there was going to be a tomorrow. And Janet and I were kind of joking earlier about how never in my life did I would think that 10 years later, I would be sitting doing a podcast celebrating that Reclaim had been around for 10 years. So I want to spread a message of hope about the future looks bright.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll just end by saying, you know, I think you used the word earlier, unapologetic. This was before the podcast started, but I just, you know, unapologetically on behalf of therapists and Reclaim, I want to reclaim the word love to use between our coworkers and, you know, clients, that this really is the heart of what we do. And so, you know, you can geek out on talking about therapeutic modalities and this, that, and the other thing, and you know, how's that?
You can geek out.
I can geek out. I don't geek out on those things, but you know, and we have the annual Celebrate the Love Brunch, right? And that's not those words aren't chosen by accident, because I think for me that is a part of kind of counterculture as a therapist, at least at this point. You know, and where we are is to be able to use that language to claim that that's what we are doing here, right? You know, of course, within ethics, within boundaries, within all of these things. I hope I don't need to say that, but I'll say it in case, you know, don't email me. But that's what we're doing, right? And I think it's a beautiful thing to get to say that that's what we are doing. That's what we are making with one another. It's people need to love themselves. They need to feel loved. I need to experience that when I walk in, you know, to my workspace. You know, that there's care and compassion and support for me and what I do every day. So yeah, and that's a part of what, you know, when we are doing healing justice and social change work, it's hard. It is hard. There are deep wounds. There is so much pain, right? And I want to say I appreciate, especially Autumn, getting to work with you, because that is so much in the heart of everything you do. We can go to some very, very painful places with each other, because you do it with so much love in your heart. I've been able to do things that I would not normally be able to do. So thank you for bringing that and modeling that. And I hope that that's always, you know, whatever we're doing with each other, that love is at the heart. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah. And Gender Stories listeners who are joining us right now, I wish you could be in the room with us to feel the love. It's like, I think we're all tearing up here on the panel. I know I am. And I knew, like, today when I was coming here, I was like, what should I wear? And I was like, oh, my Queer and Trans You Fear Love t-shirt, of course, because Reclaim is about love. And so thank you for joining us for this Love Fest. All of you who are here and have shared your stories so beautifully and so vulnerably. And all of you who've been here live, kind of listening to those stories, and who have your own stories. Like, I wish I had like about a week to interview each and every one of you, because there's so much wisdom and so much beauty and so much love in this room. And if you're listening and you're not in a place where you have that love in your life, I hope that maybe you can take a moment to breathe the love that's in this room and feel that thread of connection. And so that thread of connection, that thread of possibility, that thread of love, and find a way to grab onto that thread and keep weaving it into your own life. So thank you again for your wisdom, and thank you for listening. That's it.
Love, appreciation for you, Alex, for coming and doing this podcast as the anchor for our 10-year anniversary celebration, our kickoff of our campaign. Thank you, Ellie, Janet, and Autumn for sharing. It was like a beautiful conversation to listen to. I know, but I love you each. And
we love you, Mary Rose.
So So now we still have a little bit longer for the open house. So for people who came and you just came for the program at 4, there's going to be a tour starting up in the front lobby, maybe in about 15 minutes. And just enjoy some more food, connecting with these amazing folks and our therapy team who are all still around in the space. And I just want to say something Jan has said many times, which is that Reclaim exists because the community, every step of the way, has built the bridge under this organization. I know, and I'm teary. When we did this chart reading about Reclaim kind of in the stars, said that's in the stars, like it is going to be supported. We can keep trusting that this work is really essential in our communities and that it will be supported, and that I just have to keep stepping out, because we always are like, how can we do this? We don't know, and then we take a step and then there is a resource. And so for so many of you who really have been, everybody here, like this is our community, this is our resourcing, so thank you for resourcing Reclaim and helping us to grow into the future. Thank you. Okay, that's it.
Disconnecting my folks on Facebook.